What would you do if you caught your own wife and son-in-law plotting to steal your entire life? That's not a riddle, it's my story. And before we go any further, let me warn you, this is not just a tale of marriage gone wrong. This is a story of family betrayal, of hidden conspiracies whispered behind half-closed curtains, and of a man who pressed record at the exact moment his world was about to collapse. If you've ever wondered how quickly trust can turn into a weapon, you're in the right place. This is dark, this is real, and it will shake everything you thought you knew about love, loyalty, and justice. It began on what should have been an ordinary afternoon. I was driving past my daughter Sophia's home, a place I'd helped renovate myself years ago, when something metallic and familiar caught my eye. Parked boldly in the driveway was a silver Lexus, Elaine's Lexus, my wife's car. The same car that, according to her, should have been sitting safely in our garage across town. For a split second, I told myself there had to be a harmless reason, but then a chill ran through me, the kind of chill you don't ignore. Something was wrong. I pulled over, my heart pounding harder than it had in years. I stepped out slowly, careful not to slam the door. The house was quiet, blinds drawn just enough to leave a sliver of vision. As I moved closer, the faint hum of voices floated through the air. At first it was muffled, indistinct, but then I recognized a sound that once brought me comfort, the laughter of my wife. Except this time, it didn't sound like laughter. It sounded like poison. And then I heard it, words that split my chest open like a blade. When the old fool finally signs the papers, we'll have everything we planned for. The old fool. That was me. Elaine's voice, calm and calculated, floated through the half-open window like venom. Beside her, Ryan Mitchell. My own son-in-law, a man I had once welcomed into my family, was leaning back like a predator who already knew the hunt was over. I froze. 25 years of marriage, 25 years of sacrifice suddenly reduced to a strategy session about how to carve me up like a business deal. My hands shook as I slipped my phone from my pocket. My thumb hovered over the record button for half a second before instinct took over. I pressed it. The tiny red light glowed on the screen, capturing every syllable, every laugh, every betrayal. What came next is the reason you're here. Because this recording, 43 minutes of cold conspiracy, was about to destroy the illusion of my marriage, shatter my faith in family, and set me on a path of revenge I never thought I'd walk. This isn't just a divorce story, it's a cautionary tale about trust, greed, and the kind of betrayal that can only come from the people you love most. Stay with me, because once you hear what I heard, you'll never look at family the same way again. I stood there in the shadows, pressed against the brick, my phone recording my pulse thundering in my ears. Through the gap in the curtains, I could see them. Elaine, my wife of 25 years, lounging comfortably on my daughter Sophia's couch, as though she owned it. And Ryan Mitchell, my son-in-law, leaning against the bookshelf with the smug posture of a man who believed he'd already won. I had always known Ryan had ambition, but what I heard coming from his mouth that afternoon was not ambition. It was a blueprint for my destruction. His voice was crisp, polished, the voice of a lawyer rehearsing his argument. The timeline's perfect. File in June, claim irreconcilable differences. With the new Iowa statutes, Elaine is entitled to half of everything acquired during the marriage plus spousal support for life. I felt my throat tighten. Half of everything. The company I had built from nothing, the rental homes I'd poured sweat into, the vacation property we'd worked years to afford, all suddenly reduced to bullet points in Ryan's calculated monologue. Elaine laughed, then a light tinkling sound that once warmed me but now landed like shards of glass. The construction business alone is worth $12 million. Add the rentals, the lake house investments, we're looking at nearly $20 million total. She spoke casually, as if tallying shopping receipts, not decades of my labor. My chest burned as the numbers tumbled from her mouth. To them, my life was nothing more than a balance sheet. Ryan gestured toward a manila folder on the coffee table. We've already copied bank statements, property deeds, business valuations. He practically handed us the keys to his kingdom. Then came Elaine's words, the words that still sting even as I replay them in my mind. 2 years of playing the devoted wife, pretending to care about his boring construction stories, nodding sympathetically when he worried about payroll. God, the man actually believes I love him. That sentence split me open. For 25 years, I had believed we were building a marriage, a partnership, a family, and in one moment I discovered that to her, it was performance an act sustained for profit. My legs trembled as I leaned harder against the wall, terrified they'd hear me collapse. A twig snapped beneath my shoe, and for a terrifying second, their heads snapped toward the window like startled deer. Elaine's voice rose sharp with suspicion. "Did you hear something?" Ryan smirked dismissive. "Probably just the neighbor's cat." "You're paranoid." The man couldn't spot a conspiracy if it wore a neon sign. He laughed a low sound filled with contempt, the kind of laugh a predator makes when it thinks the prey is already caught. And then Ryan's voice turned darker. "By September, you'll be divorced, wealthy, and free to do whatever you want with whoever you want. He'll be too busy licking his wounds to fight back." Elaine's reply was soft but lethal. "Perfect. I've been suffocating for years." Each word twisted deeper, but I forced myself to keep recording every second now. Evidence, every cruel laugh, a nail in their coffin. They thought I was blind, thought my trust made me weak. But what they didn't understand is that I had spent 35 years navigating contracts, labor disputes, and municipal politics. I recognized strategy when I heard it, and I knew then that this was no passing fantasy they had been documenting, preparing, rehearsing. As the conversation continued, they mocked the very core of my being. Ryan described how easy it had been to pump Sophia for information about my business structures, how Elaine had feigned interest in financial reports only to catalog assets. They spoke of me as though I were already gone, a relic, a naive provider who had outlived his usefulness. Elaine even joked, "The only thing heavier than his wallet is his snoring." They both laughed. I clenched my fists until my nails dug into my palms, but I stayed hidden because now I understood this was bigger than infidelity. This was a coordinated heist carried out by the two people I should have been able to trust most. 15 minutes later, when their voices finally softened into routine chatter, I crept back to my car phone, still recording. I slid behind the wheel and sat in silence, staring at the steering wheel that my shaking hands gripped like a lifeline. 25 years of marriage reduced to a scheme. The folder on that coffee table haunted me months of preparation while I was working 16-hour days to build the future they were planning to steal. I looked down at my hands. These were the same hands that had built houses for families across Iowa, that had laid the foundation for Cole Construction, now Harris Construction, a company worth millions that had held Elaine's hand when we exchanged vows in 1987, that had carried Sophia when she was born in 1995. And now those same hands were shaking, not from weakness, but from the realization that my life had been infiltrated. The betrayal wasn't abstract. It was recorded, time-stamped, undeniable. As I started the car, the words echoed again. The man actually believes I love him. Until 30 minutes earlier, I had. But now love had been stripped away, and in its place, a colder, sharper resolve was forming. If they thought I was too trusting to see through the lies, they were about to learn that trust, once broken, can transform into something far more dangerous: strategy fueled by fury. When I finally turned the key and pulled into the driveway, my pulse still hammered from what I had just recorded. I knew I couldn't show my hand yet, not until I understood the depth of the conspiracy, so I forced myself to put on the same mask I'd worn for 25 years. The front door of Sophia's house opened just as I killed the engine. Elaine stepped out, first designer bag swinging from her wrist like a trophy, followed by Ryan adjusting his tie with the precision of a man who wanted the world to think he had control. For half a second, her face betrayed shock. Her eyes widened, her lips parted, but then she smoothed it away, replacing raw surprise with a smile I had seen 1,000 times before. "David," she said, voice climbing, an octave feigned delight covering nervous calculation. "What are you doing here?" I kept my own expression neutral, slipping into the role of the hardworking husband, dropping by unannounced. "Finished a job site inspection nearby?" I lied smoothly, climbing out of the car. "Thought I'd stop and see Sophia." My daughter's car wasn't in the drive, and I knew from earlier she was at the clinic, but that didn't matter. It was a cover that explained my presence without exposing that I had already been hiding by the window. Ryan moved a step closer to Elaine, protective, or maybe territorial, his gray eyes scanning my face for cracks. I met his gaze, steady but friendly, and watched as he tried to decide whether I knew anything. "She's not here." Elaine cut in quickly, too quickly. I was helping Ryan organize some legal documents for a client." The lie rolled off her tongue as if rehearsed. My mind replayed the recording the way she had mocked my stories of payroll worries, the way he had tallied my assets like chips in a poker game. But I kept my smile, even forced a chuckle. "Oh, I thought you'd be at work until 6. Didn't you mention something about the Henderson proposal this morning?" For a fraction of a second, panic flickered across her features before she caught it. "I left early. Headache." She tilted her head, performing concern for herself, as if the act could erase 20 minutes of betrayal. "Sorry to hear that." I turned to Ryan, my tone casual. "Interesting case." He almost slipped, answering with too much confidence, "Asset division." Then he hesitated, covering. "For a divorce client, very complex situation." I could have laughed at the irony if it hadn't been my own life he was dissecting. Elaine's eyes darted between us, calculating, probing for signs of what I'd heard. "How long have you been here, David?" she asked. I shrugged. "Just pulled up." "Why, no reason," she said, painting on a smile that looked more like a mask than ever. "You seem tense. Everything okay?" The woman who had plotted my financial ruin was asking if I was all right. It was almost comedic, except for the taste of bile in my throat. "Long day," I said evenly. "You know how it is." I gestured toward Ryan. "Don't let me interrupt your work session." He nodded, his hand slipping to Elaine's lower back, with a familiarity that made my blood run cold. The gesture was automatic, intimate, casual, in a way no son-in-law should ever touch his mother-in-law. My mind screamed, but my face gave nothing away. "We were just finishing up," he said, as if to reassure me. I pulled out my phone casually, checking the time, making sure they noticed the device in my hand. Neither flinched, but I saw Ryan's eyes linger just a fraction too long on the screen, maybe wondering if I had already captured something damning. "I should head home," I said, opening my car door. "Dinner won't cook itself." Elaine laughed, but it was forced brittle. "I'll be along shortly. Just need to wrap up a few things here." I paused deliberately, as if remembering. "Oh, Elaine, Dr. Patterson's office called about rescheduling your physical. Something about a conflict with your work schedule." For a split second, her face went blank. Then she recovered too quickly. "Must be a mix-up. I'll call them later." I nodded, slid into the driver's seat, and started the engine. Through the mirror, I saw them standing frozen until my car disappeared around the corner. Then, like actors whose scene had ended, they moved closer together, heads bent in urgent conversation. Back home, the silence felt different now. Not peaceful, not familiar, but hollow. Elaine would walk through our front door later with a dozen excuses, ready rehearsed lines prepared to explain away her presence at Ryan's house. She'd ask about my day, maybe kiss my cheek, pretending 25 years of marriage still meant something. And I would nod, pretending to believe, just as Sophia still believed in the image of a loving mother and supportive husband. My daughter had no idea that her husband and her mother were co-conspirators, weaving lies over brunches and whispered phone calls. The three of us became players in a theater of deception. Elaine played the devoted wife, Ryan, the helpful son-in-law, and me, the trusting husband. Sophia, oblivious, continued her routines, calling me about patients, talking about family dinners, never suspecting that every smile at the table was counterfeit. That was the cruelest part of betrayal, not the lies themselves, but the way the liars demanded you perform along with them, pretending the world wasn't crumbling behind the curtain. I walked into the house Elaine and I had shared since 1995, a place I had designed board by board, brick by brick, believing every nail driven into its frame was a promise of permanence. That evening, though, the air felt heavy, the silence hollow, not peaceful. I set my keys on the kitchen counter and stood there staring at the framed photo on the mantel. December 15th, 1987, our wedding day. Elaine radiant in ivory silk, her smile lighting up the room, me in a rented tuxedo, awkward but proud. I had believed that moment was the beginning of everything good in my life. But as I stared at it now, after hearing her laugh at me in Ryan's living room, I realized that perhaps even that day had been less about love and more about opportunity. The memory stabbed at me with new meaning. Back then I was 37, a construction man, finally breaking through after years of instant noodles and 12-hour days. She was 22, working as a secretary downtown, quick with a laugh that sounded like silver bells. I thought it was destiny. Now I wondered if she had simply seen a rising star to hitch herself to. Our first date at Romano's Italian lasted until midnight. I had shared dreams of building homes that would outlive us both, shelters for families, legacies of craftsmanship. Elaine had leaned across the table, touched my hand, and whispered, "You're not just building structures, you're building homes." At the time, it felt like understanding. Tonight, it echoed like strategy. I sat in my leather recliner, the one she always said was too ugly for the formal living room, and let memories wash over me like cold water. The cruise to Alaska for our 10th anniversary, when she pressed against the ship's railing, genuinely delighted, or so I had thought, by glaciers and whales. The night Sophia graduated high school, tears streaming down Elaine's face as she whispered, "She's going to do incredible things because of the foundation you gave her." I had thought it was gratitude. Now, knowing what I know, those moments felt rehearsed, like lines in a script meant to keep me working, building, earning. Our 25th anniversary card still sat on the kitchen table, her handwriting flowing in blue ink. "To my wonderful husband, thank you for making all my dreams come true. Here's to 25 more years of happiness. All my love, Elaine." All her love. The words tasted bitter now, not sweet. That anniversary had been last December. By then, she was already funneling money into secret accounts, already conspiring with Ryan. When she signed "all my love," what she really meant was "all your wealth." The cracks, I realized, had begun years earlier, around 2020, when Harris Construction landed the Morrison Municipal Center contract, $50 million over 3 years, the biggest in company history. I came home that night expecting champagne, a toast to my team's hard work, maybe even the spark of intimacy we hadn't shared in months. Instead, I found Elaine at the kitchen table with a real estate magazine and a calculator. "This means we can finally afford the house on Elm Street," she said, eyes shining. "The one with the circular driveway and the pool. They're asking $4.2 million. Not once did she say congratulations. Not once did she ask about the hundreds of jobs the project would create. To her, my success was a shopping spree waiting to happen. From there, the entitlement grew. By 2021, the country club membership was non-negotiable because the Pattersons had joined. Our lake cabin in Wisconsin, once our escape, suddenly wasn't good enough compared to the Johnsons' place in Aspen. At dinners, conversations shifted. She spoke less about our life and more about what other wives received. Sarah Mitchell's husband bought her a Mercedes, she'd say, slicing salmon with surgical precision. Because he appreciates what she sacrificed. Elaine had lived in luxury for decades, every need provided, every want fulfilled, and yet she still felt shortchanged. The intimacy between us faded gradually, like paint peeling so slowly you don't notice until the wall is bare. Separate bedrooms became necessary because of my snoring, though she'd never mentioned it before. Her phone calls became private, whispered in other rooms, labeled as book club discussions or charity work. I had wanted to believe her. Tonight I knew better. Those weren't conversations about books, they were strategy sessions with Ryan. I pressed replay on my phone, listening to the recording again, to the way she mocked me, 2 years of playing the devoted wife. It explained everything: the sudden curiosity about tax documents, her insistence on joint accounts while keeping her own credit cards, the way she feigned sympathy about payroll stress while secretly cataloging assets. Every kiss, every anniversary toast, every whispered "I love you" in the dark had been currency, not affection. Sitting there in the dark, I felt grief, yes, but something colder crept in too. A new clarity. Elaine thought she was playing chess while I was playing checkers. But she had forgotten who I was. I had built an empire from a single truck and a borrowed tool set. I had negotiated with unions, navigated city contracts, fought through recessions. I was not a fool. If love had been a performance for her, then strategy would become survival for me. The marriage was a lie, but the skills I had honed in business were real. And now, for the first time, I would turn those skills inward, not to build, but to protect, to defend, and to strike back. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my office surrounded by 35 years of paperwork, contracts, tax returns, deeds, the blueprints of the empire I had built one late night at a time. My leather chair creaked beneath me as I leaned forward, yellow legal pads spread across the mahogany desk I had carved by hand. On each pad, I had drawn columns, assets, weaknesses, timeline, leverage points. This wasn't grief anymore. This was war planning. Elaine and Ryan thought they had the board set, but they didn't know I was already studying the pieces. The first call I made was to Caleb Brooks, my accountant, and one of the few men I trusted. He had been with me since the early days, back when I was still running Harris Construction, out of a rented warehouse, in chasing clients with a beat-up pickup truck. When Caleb answered, his voice carried that familiar mix of calm and sharp precision. I told him enough to make him understand. "We're not talking tax optimization anymore," I said. "We're talking survival." There was a pause on the line, the weight of 30 years of loyalty pressing through. "Tell me what you need," he replied. By morning, Caleb had outlined how we could protect the company's most valuable holdings through offshore accounts I had set up years ago, completely legal but invisible to anyone without forensic skill. Elaine's amateur detective work had cataloged the visible wealth. She hadn't even touched the crown jewels. The second call was to Dr. Grace Nguyen, a forensic accountant who had worked with me on municipal audits. If Caleb was the numbers man, Grace was the bloodhound. She didn't just balance books, she tracked patterns, sniffed out irregularities, and could turn a spreadsheet into a courtroom weapon. I asked her to analyze Elaine's spending. Within days, she had flagged $47,000 in transfers to an account I had never seen before. The beneficiary, Ryan Mitchell. Grace traced the trail: luxury lunches at Riverside Country Club, spa treatments, designer clothing, all charged during Elaine's so-called book club meetings. Every receipt was a betrayal in ink. When Grace emailed me the files, she added a single line: "Your wife isn't planning a divorce, she's staging a financial coup." But numbers alone weren't enough. I needed eyes, ears, someone who could track Ryan beyond the courtroom. That's when I called Victor Alvarez, a private investigator with a reputation for discretion. He had once handled a subcontractor embezzlement case for me and delivered results that made the police look like amateurs. "Follow him," I instructed. "Document everything. Who he meets, what he says, where the money goes." Within a week, Victor had built a profile that turned Ryan from ambitious lawyer into a liability waiting to collapse. Ryan owed $180,000 in student loans, carried an $500 a month office lease he couldn't afford, and had already racked up 2 complaints with the state bar for mishandling client funds. Dismissed, yes, but documented. In the legal world, stains like that never wash out. The pièce de resistance came from Edward Collins, president of First National Bank and my golf partner for 15 years. I asked for a private meeting in his conference room, the one that always smelled faintly of coffee and leather. I slid a stack of documents across the polished table. "I need every joint access point frozen, temporarily. Identity verification for any withdrawals. No exceptions." Edward studied me for a long moment. "This is comprehensive, David. It's going to inconvenience Elaine significantly." I didn't flinch. "I'm counting on it." With my signature, the accounts were locked down by 11:47 a.m. By lunchtime, Elaine's credit card was declined in front of her friends at Riverside. The performance of the perfect wife cracked when she couldn't pay for her own salad. She called me within an hour, panic bleeding through her carefully trained tone. "David, something's wrong with the accounts. My card was declined. The bank says there's a hold. Do you know anything about this?" I played dumb. "Security hold." "That sounds serious. Did they say what triggered it?" She stumbled through excuses, trying not to reveal that she had been moving money into secret accounts. To her, the humiliation of social exposure stung more than the loss of cash. Meanwhile, Ryan was discovering the same truth. Victor reported that he had stormed into the bank 3 times demanding access to accounts he believed he controlled. He had even tried to raid Sophia's education trust, only to find it locked behind my new security protocols. He called the bank, threatened legal action, slammed phones on desks. Victor described him as a shark trapped in a fishbowl, thrashing but going nowhere. Every move he made tightened the net around him. I sat in my office late at night replaying the day's events, every text from Elaine, every furious voicemail from Ryan, and felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Calm. For the first time since I pressed record outside that window, I was no longer reacting. I was dictating. They thought they were preparing a courtroom ambush, but in truth they were pawns stumbling deeper into exposure. My legal pads filled with arrows and notes, each discovery strengthening my hand. Elaine had mocked me as the man who actually believes I love him. She was about to discover that the man she underestimated was also the man who never lost a negotiation in his life. This was no longer just about protecting money. It was about reclaiming dignity, about turning betrayal into evidence, lies into leverage. Elaine and Ryan wanted a war for $20 million. What they got instead was a lesson in what happens when you try to rob a builder of the very empire he created. I remember the night Sophia walked into my office, her face set in that careful professional neutrality she had learned as a psychologist. My daughter, the same little girl I had carried on my shoulders through soccer games, the same woman I had walked down the aisle only a year earlier, now looked at me as though I were a patient under examination. "Dad, we need to talk about what's happening between you and Mom," she said, her voice even almost clinical. I braced myself. Elaine had already been planting seeds, weaving her narrative of financial control and emotional intimidation. Ryan had no doubt whispered into Sophia's ear about my supposed paranoia. I knew this was a test, maybe the most important one of my life. "What has she told you?" I asked, keeping my own voice steady. Sophia folded her hands in her lap the way she did when interviewing clients. "That you're exhibiting controlling behaviors, that you've restricted her access to accounts, that you might be emotionally abusive." The words cut deeper than I expected. To hear my daughter speak them, even in professional detachment, was like being accused by my own reflection. But I saw something in her eyes, doubt. She wasn't convinced. She was probing. So I reached for the one weapon Elaine and Ryan never expected me to use against them, the truth. I unlocked my phone, opened the file, and pressed play. From the speaker poured Elaine's laughter, cold and sharp. "When the old fool finally signs the papers, we'll have everything we planned for." Sophia froze, her fingers tightening. Minute by minute, she listened Ryan's crisp breakdown of how Iowa statutes guaranteed spousal support, Elaine's mocking tone, as she admitted to 2 years of playing the devoted wife, their calculated plan to use Sophia's own credentials against me. At first, my daughter's face stayed composed, the mask of a therapist trained to observe without judgment. But when she heard her mother say, "God, the man actually believes I love him," Sophia's composure cracked. Her jaw clenched. Her eyes glistened, not with tears, but with anger. The recording ended. Silence stretched between us, heavy as stone. Finally, she spoke. "I choose evidence over emotion. I choose truth over loyalty." In that moment, the conspiracy shattered. Elaine had lost the one ally she counted on most. Sophia stood her decision firm. "If this goes to court, I'll testify honestly. But don't ever use me as a weapon, Dad. Not even against them." I nodded, pride and sorrow mingling in my chest. My daughter had inherited my resolve, but she had forged her own path. The courtroom came next. Davenport County Courthouse, May 1st. Judge Karen Whitfield presiding, a woman known for cutting through lies like a scalpel. Elaine entered dressed in muted tones, makeup softened posture, trembling just enough to look like a victim. Beside her sat Linda Hawthorne, the ruthless attorney hired for scorched earth tactics. On the other side of the aisle, Ryan hovered like a vulture pretending to be supportive counsel, though his bar license was already under review. Elaine's voice trembled as she testified. "For months, my husband has restricted my access to our accounts, monitoring my spending, threatening me with nothing if I tried to leave. Last week, he cut off my access completely. I fear for my financial safety." Her performance was convincing on the surface. Gasps echoed in the gallery. The narrative was clear. I was the controlling husband, the abuser hiding behind wealth. Judge Whitfield raised her eyes to my attorney, Frank Delgado. "Does the defense wish to respond?" Frank stood calm and deliberate. "Your Honor, we contend that Mrs. Harris's claims are not only false, but part of a deliberate conspiracy to defraud my client of marital assets. We have evidence." Elaine's face paled. Linda whispered frantically, sensing danger. Frank tapped his phone against the courtroom's audio system. "Exhibit A." And then my house of cards became their collapse. Elaine's voice filled the chamber. "When the old fool finally signs the papers, we'll have everything we planned for." For 43 minutes, the courtroom listened to their laughter, their strategy, their cruelty. Every mockery, every calculation, every betrayal echoed through the speakers, impossible to spin, impossible to deny. Gasps turned into murmurs, murmurs into outrage. When the recording ended, Judge Whitfield's expression was granite. She turned to Elaine. "Do you have any response?" Elaine opened her mouth, but no words came. Linda raised her hands in surrender. "Your Honor, I must withdraw from this case. I was not informed of these circumstances." Permission granted. Elaine sat frozen, abandoned by her own attorney. The gavel came down like thunder. "The petition for emergency restraining order is dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, I am referring this matter to the district attorney for investigation of possible perjury. In that instant, the roles flipped. I was no longer the accused. I was vindicated. Elaine and Ryan were exposed not as victims, but as conspirators. Sophia sat behind me, her hand resting briefly on my shoulder. It wasn't an embrace, but it was enough. In that touch, I felt the weight of her decision, the courage it took to stand against her mother and her husband. And for the first time since pressing record outside Ryan's window, I felt something close to peace. Because in that courtroom under the bright lights and sharp gavel of justice, the truth finally spoke louder than the lies. The sound of the gavel that day did more than dismiss a restraining order. It detonated the lives of everyone who had thought they could destroy me. What followed in the weeks and months after the courtroom climax was not just fallout. It was the complete dismantling of a carefully staged illusion. Elaine had walked into that courthouse believing she would emerge with half my fortune, armed with spousal support sympathy in the upper hand. Instead, she walked out exposed, discredited, and abandoned. The district attorney moved quickly, and though perjury charges take time to grind through the system, the stain was immediate. Friends stopped answering her calls. Invitations evaporated. The Riverside Country Club suspended her membership pending review. The same women she had once laughed with over champagne now pretended not to see her in the grocery store aisles. At home, the consequences were harsher still. The prenuptial agreement she had signed eagerly back in 1987, forgotten by her, in her greed came back like a ghost. With her deception proven, with her credibility destroyed, that prenup meant she had little claim to my assets. She got nothing of the company, none of the vacation homes, not a dollar of spousal support. Instead, she packed her clothes into suitcases and moved into a small rental near the mall, where 6 months later she took a job folding sweaters and ringing up sales for minimum wage. I heard about it from a former neighbor who whispered the story with a mix of pity and schadenfreude. Elaine, who once measured her worth by handbags and gala invitations, now standing under fluorescent lights scanning barcodes. I never gloated out loud, but privately, I thought this was never about punishment. It was about balance being restored. Ryan's collapse came even faster. The State Bar Association wasted no time once the 43-minute recording and the additional contractor complaints landed on their desk. The investigation that had started with murmurs of ethical violations ended with a full audit of his trust accounts. They discovered $127,000 in client funds missing, siphoned into personal expenses. That was the death blow. His license wasn't suspended, it was revoked permanently. Without a license, his expensive office lease was worthless, his clients scattered, and his reputation obliterated. By the time summer arrived, he had packed up 3 boxes of files and disappeared to Nebraska, where I later learned he was working as a paralegal for a firm that didn't mind hiring the disgraced. The man who had boasted about painting me as a controlling husband now shuffled papers for someone else's cases, his name a cautionary tale whispered among lawyers. Sophia, my daughter, bore the heaviest personal cost, though she carried it with grace. She confronted Ryan in their home the night she listened to the recording, and what began as a confrontation ended as a divorce filing. I will never forget the way she told me, calm and resolute, "My marriage is over. I cannot share a life with a man who plotted against my father and used my credentials as a weapon." Those words both broke and healed me. As a father, I ached to see her suffer the betrayal of both her husband and her mother. But as a man, I respected her courage to choose truth over illusion. She pursued the divorce quietly, professionally, making no spectacle. She returned to her psychology practice, where she shifted her specialty toward family therapy, especially helping clients identify manipulation patterns. In her pain, she found purpose. And though the scars will never leave, she built something stronger from them. And me, I emerged from the storm battered but unbroken. Harris Construction not only survived it, thrived. The community saw the headlines, heard the stories, and instead of doubting me, they rallied. I had built schools, hospitals, homes for 3 decades, and that goodwill became a shield. New contracts poured in, partnerships deepened, because people respect a man who weathers betrayal without surrendering to it. The house I had built with my own hands felt different now, emptier, yes, but honest. No more rehearsed affection, no more scripted I love yous. Just the sound of rain on the windows, tools in the garage, the creak of the leather chair where I drafted plans. The irony wasn't lost on me. Elaine once told Ryan, "God, the man actually believes I love him." She was right, I did. But now in the silence of a home stripped of pretense, I knew the difference between love and performance. She had lost everything because she thought manipulation could outlast truth. Ryan had lost his career because he thought greed was smarter than integrity. Sophia had lost her marriage but gained clarity. And I had lost the illusion but gained something stronger. My dignity, my freedom, my life returned to me without lies. In the end, betrayal didn't destroy me. It revealed me. The weeks after the courtroom battle felt strangely quiet. For the first time in months, my phone no longer buzzed with frantic calls from Elaine or furious threats from Ryan. The war was over, and the silence left in its place was almost unsettling. Yet silence has a way of revealing truths words often hide. One evening as the sun dipped behind the sycamores lining my driveway, Sophia pulled into the circular path in front of my house. She stepped out of her car slowly, not with the lightness of a daughter coming home, but with the measured pace of someone carrying invisible weight. I met her on the porch, neither of us rushing to speak. Sometimes absence of words is its own language. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Elaine had once sketched her fantasies of luxury homes and vacations, the same table where birthday cakes had been cut and Christmas dinners served. Sophia folded her hands, staring at the wood grain. I wanted to reach across to tell her how sorry I was for what she'd been forced to endure, betrayed by both a husband and a mother. But I stopped myself. This wasn't a moment for apologies or lectures. This was a moment to simply be present. After a long pause, she spoke, her voice softer than I'd heard in weeks. I keep trying to figure out when it all became a performance, she said. With Ryan, with Mom, even with myself. I should have seen it. I shook my head. Don't do that, Sophia. Deception is designed to be invisible. If it were obvious, it wouldn't work. She looked at me then, her green eyes so much like Elaine's, but clearer, steadier. You really didn't know, did you, for all those years? The question carried no accusation, just wonder. No, I admitted. I believed in your mother. I believed in my family. That belief became blindness, and blindness has a cost. We sat there in silence again, letting the words linger. She reached for her coffee cup the same way she did in her sessions when buying time. I've decided to focus my practice on family manipulation cases, she said finally. It feels right to take what I've lived through and use it to help others. My chest tightened with pride, but also sorrow. No father wants his daughter to learn about betrayal firsthand. Yet I understood. She wasn't just surviving. She was transforming pain into purpose. Later, we moved into the living room. She glanced at the wedding photo still sitting on the mantel. For years, that picture had symbolized love and commitment. Now it felt like an artifact of a myth. Sophia walked over, lifted the frame, and studied it. I look at this and wonder if she was already planning, she whispered. I joined her, standing shoulder to shoulder. Maybe she was, I said. Or maybe she meant it at the time, and somewhere along the way, greed hollowed her out. Either way, the photo belongs to a story that ended. Sophia set it back down carefully, as though returning a fragile relic to its place. We didn't hug. We didn't cry. Instead, we watched the rain streak across the windows I had installed decades earlier. There was a kind of honesty in that silence, an unspoken agreement that we could acknowledge the wreckage without letting it define us. Sophia leaned back against the couch, pulling a blanket over her legs. Do you ever feel like you're finally seeing clearly, even though it hurts more than being blind, she asked. I nodded. Clarity doesn't always feel like a gift, but it is. Pain fades. Truth doesn't. As the night deepened, our conversation turned lighter memories of Sophia's childhood. The time I built her a treehouse that leaned so badly the neighbors called it the Tilted Tower. The endless soccer practices where Elaine had cheered louder than anyone back when her cheers felt real. For the first time in a long time, Sophia laughed. Not the polite laugh she'd used with Ryan, not the strained laugh she'd forced with Elaine, but her real laugh, the one that belonged to the girl I remembered. When she left that night, she paused at the door. Dad, she said, I know things won't ever go back to how they were, but I want you to know I trust you. The words hit harder than any verdict. Trust after betrayal is the rarest currency. I nodded, unable to say more, and she walked into the night. In the weeks that followed, our relationship didn't transform overnight. We didn't suddenly become inseparable, but something essential shifted. There was no performance anymore, no pretending, just a father and daughter navigating the wreckage of lies, finding steady ground in honesty. Sometimes healing doesn't come in dramatic gestures or tearful reconciliations. Sometimes it comes in quiet evenings, in rain against windows, in the silence of two people who finally see each other clearly. And in that silence, Sophia and I found something stronger than the love we thought we'd lost. Trust rebuilt, fragile but real. The house was quiet, almost too quiet. No clinking glasses from dinner parties Elaine had once demanded, no forced laughter, echoing off the vaulted ceilings, no hushed phone calls in the other room, pretending to be about book clubs. Just me. The walls I had raised with my own two hands stood taller than ever, stripped of lies, stripped of performance. I walked through each room slowly, as if reclaiming territory stolen from me, not by strangers, but by the people who should have guarded it with me. In the living room, the rain tapped steady against the windows I'd installed in 1995. I lowered myself into the leather recliner. Elaine had always hated the ones she called too ugly for guests. For the first time in decades, it didn't feel like rebellion to sit there. It felt like home. I let the silence wash over me, the kind of silence that no longer hides secrets, only truth. And I realized finally the war was done. The empire I built still stood my dignity intact, my daughter by my side in ways that mattered most. I exhaled long and deep, then whispered words I never thought I'd say, a life that's not a lie. It wasn't victory, I felt it was clarity. Betrayal had stolen years, yes, but it had also carved away illusion. I was no longer living in a performance stage for someone else's greed. I was living in honesty, even if honesty meant solitude, and that I realized was freedom. To anyone watching this who has felt that sting of betrayal by a partner, a friend, even by your own family, remember this. You cannot always stop lies from entering your life, but you can refuse to let them own you. Truth may hurt, but it also heals. It sets you free in ways deception never can. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever faced betrayal and found strength on the other side? Share your story in the comments below. I read everyone. If this story gripped you, if it made you reflect on your own life, don't just scroll away. Save this video to come back to when you need a reminder of resilience. And if you want more stories of survival, revenge, and the hidden truths that shape families, hit subscribe right now, because the next one may change the way you see trust forever.